All right, welcome everyone to Fundraising Unpacked and our first training session, Intro to Fundraising Planning. My name is Asteria Rogan and I am the Executive Assistant here at COAC Detroit. And I'd like to welcome you all to our first training session. So we're going to get started. Just want to give you a little bit about COAC. COAC Detroit is a resource hub for nonprofits and community organizations in Southeast Michigan. Our location is in Detroit in the New Center areas, New Center neighborhood. We exist to support nonprofits and community organizations. And we do this through hosting various programs and supporting with administering grants as well as grants as well. To learn more about COAC Detroit, I will visit our website at coacdetroit.org and I will put that in the chat. Okay. I will be your tech support, so if you have any technical difficulties today, I will do my best to resolve them today. And we will be recording the session and it will be made available in our virtual resource library, which is on our website. And you will be able to find that after this training series, we'll have all the recordings uploaded there. Okay. We appreciate everyone for being here today. And I'm glad you are all here. If you could please make sure you drop your name in the chat and your pronouns as well and your organization if you don't mind. And now I'm going to let our facilitator, Trish DeWalt, introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Trish DeWald. I'm an advisor to COAC Detroit, and I'm also the principal at Mondo Unlimited. I'm going to be the facilitator today for this training, and it will be cursory for some of you and review for many of you. I see a lot of familiar faces here and folks that have been fundraising for as long as I have, and maybe even a little bit longer. So thank you to everyone who's made time and space in your calendar to join us today to participate in this session on how to plan for fund development success. All right, Asteria, I think we're going to get right over to our slide 7, it looks like. So we'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. But I did also want to remind folks at this point that COAC Detroit provides a really intimate opportunity to talk to professionals across the nonprofit landscape through CoLab Connect. Those are 1-hour sessions that you can join with professionals in myriad categories to support you, whether it's legal, fund development, marketing, human resources. And those appointments are available throughout the course of the year. And you can sign up through their website that Charnay already posted. All right, so before we get started, who has a fundraising plan? You can just drop an emoji. Do you have and work a fundraising plan? I love it. Ben's laughing at us. Lots of claps. You know, I think our fundraising plan really provides us with guardrails when we're working in this space. Guardrails for ourselves to keep us on task, but also provides the opportunity to work with our volunteers and our board members. And so as you keep dropping your emojis and whether or not you have it, I want to remind everybody that failing to plan is planning to fail. I stole that from somebody way smarter than me. But at the end of this training, everybody should be able to understand what goes into a fund development plan, see where your organization is right now, but also be able to envision where you're going in the future. And I think that's really the key to having this fund development plan, is being able to see into the future a little bit. We're going to be talking about the basic steps for you to develop this fund development plan. But remember, you can't do this in a vacuum, right? As one human, you're only one human. So it's key to have partnerships, communication, working with your colleagues, your board members, your volunteers, or if you're a one-person show, this is really a wonderful accountability tool. You're not responsible for doing this all by yourself. It can be noisy to be a fund development professional. Lots can be thrown at you. But creating this plan and socializing it across the board with your colleagues will help to ensure that you're successful and focused. Oftentimes our board members or colleagues in the space like to say something like, hey, how can we get money from Oprah or Bill Gates, or in our community, gosh, Dan Gilbert has so much money. Why doesn't he just give it to my organization? Recently, Mackenzie Scott has just opened up a call for proposals. And I think when we have a plan and we're working the plan, some of those, hey, maybe we should, opportunities become realities. Alternatively, you can do the research and find out if those opportunities are real or opportunities that you should let somebody else approach. All right, next slide. So what exactly is a fundraising plan? Okay. So it is not a static document. It's something that you're going to put together to help guide your activities, but it's something that will evolve. It isn't something that you should create and just put on the shelf. It's something you should put together and really work. It will identify specific goals. You'll have individuals that are responsible for carrying out specific activities. There'll be a timeline, right? You've all heard SMART, specific, measurable, actionable, and timely goals. All of that should be in your fund development plan. All right, so how do we do this? Simple, just 6 steps. And I say that a little bit flippantly, but really, there are 6 components of a really good fund development plan. First, you have to look at your assets. We'll go into all these a little bit more deeply over the course of this hour. But for example, when you identify your assets, those assets look like the people on your team, the programs that you have, what you're doing in the community. What we want to avoid when we're launching our fund development activities is trying to do too much with not enough resources. The case statement, what do we do? Why do we do it? The goals, the action plan, those steps to get you to where you want to go, how to do it, and then the important part, evaluate, rethink, and redo constantly. So a little bit before we get into this, I wanted to take a moment to just share with the class here this pie chart that gives a little bit of context about where revenue tends to come from across the nonprofit sector. So this chart you'll see on the slide breaks down revenue overall, and then the next slide will focus in a little bit more on this pie. So what do you notice about this chart? Is there a story? Is there a story here? You know, I think when I look at this, it doesn't necessarily apply to every organization, right? Some organizations will receive fees for services, and that's that 70% of the pie chart. Contributions from individuals, you know, we'll get into these a little bit more depth on the next slide. But knowing where your revenue comes from or potentially could come from for your organization just helps you to be focused on how you approach and attract additional donations. And so the Indiana University does a study every year about where organizations receive their funding. And by and large, individuals are the most generous contributors to nonprofit organizations. And I want to put a big asterisk on that because nonprofit organizations include religious organizations and hospitals. And those will, by and large, receive the most donations from individuals. But in this particular context, we'll be looking at the whole pot of opportunity for where your organizations can seek contributions, including the individuals, but also foundations, a little bit about bequests and corporate funders. So I want to ask a quick question on this slide here, the pie chart just before, and you can drop your answers into the chat. But you see individuals here. I think historically, and I just mentioned several wealthy folks in our community and nationally, but when we think about individuals, we're not just talking about wealthy people. And so why? Why is that? Who else can we be asking for funding from? Who else can we invite to support our organization? Just share some of your thoughts or maybe examples of gifts that you've received from folks that might not be in that 1% mark. Donors from our community, local people that are excited about the work and what we're doing. Yeah, and we really saw in the presidential campaign with President Obama, he really called in folks to give $1, to give $5, to show that everybody has a voice, everybody's dollar counts, every gift can matter, should matter, and does matter. All right, so first step of this developing a fund development plan, we have to identify our assets. So what does that mean? What kind of assets do we have as an organization? We have them up there on the screen, right? So as you think about how to develop your fund development plan, get out your piece of paper and write down what it is that makes your organization special. What would make you want to support it, right? So when we think about how to engage and how to call people into our mission, it's really important that we know what we have that would make it special for them to support, right? And so when we talk about these assets, the facilities that we manage, the organization, the mission of the work that we're doing, it really helps to begin to craft the story about why individuals, corporations, foundations might join you in supporting it. And I think it's really important to remember as we're thinking about our assets, not to come at this from a deficit mentality. And so what do I mean by deficit? Please give me money because we need money is not a compelling story, right? Take a second, anybody who's willing to share, drop into the chat why it is that, what assets do you have? Yeah, give us money because we need it. Thanks, Amy. Why do people give to your organization? What are some assets of your specific organization? And maybe I'll pick on Amy a little bit more. Covenant House has a tremendous number of assets. I think we have a couple of folks from that organization here. What are some of your assets? Let's see. I know you're writing them down on your paper, but let's share. Historic context, a story that people can connect to. Yes, a safe place for young people that would otherwise be in a really scary, yucky situation. Those are assets. And I love to think about, there's this old school way of thinking in fundraising of being donor centric. And I think that's really dangerous in our work. I think when you're talking to anybody, it's important to consider audience. But in our work, it's really about it being community centric, about being, about holding the folks in the communities in which we mean to serve, holding them at the center of our work and the center of our communication and the reason for why we do what we do. All right, so as you're thinking about your assets, let's pop to the next slide, Asteria. This is an old school way of doing it, but a SWOT analysis. Writing down on a piece of paper or using some of the handouts that you have, just do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of your organization? I'm going to drop a link in the chat. There's a tool for conducting your own SWOT analysis. It's like a 360 look at identifying your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is really an important part of the step, because if you don't know and can't articulate your strengths and the opportunities in your work, it's really difficult to get there. But also, and I would argue in a lot of ways, more important is to know what are the threats to your organization, the threats to success with your fund development, or threats to securing that gift or hosting that event, right? So there used to be in Detroit a very handy calendar of all of the creme de la creme events. Now we have way too many events being hosted by way too many organizations now for there to be one singular source for that. But as nonprofit organizations were planning their gala or their fund development event, it was really important to look at that list to make sure that a threat could be avoided, right? You don't want to host your event the same weekend that a similar organization or competing organization might be hosting their event, just as one example. So doing this SWOT analysis, it will not only help you to identify your strengths and what you do well, but also help to identify where you might need additional resources, right? Where you might need more team members, where you might need additional funding, what some threats are, and then you can work to figure out how to turn those into strengths and opportunities. And so knowing those strengths will also help you with developing your case statement. Excuse me. We'll go to the next slide, Asteria, but I'm curious to know how many of you have an articulated case statement or case for investment for your organization. And why do you need this? What is it? What is a case statement? It's really a written document, and it can be a beautifully produced document, or it can just be a paragraph, a couple of sentences that outlines the general argument. It always needs to be updated, Krista. A general document that outlines why somebody should give to your organization. Why should I volunteer? Why should I give you my resources? Why should I be involved with your individual organization? You know, they can be 5 pages long. They can be 20 pages long. They can be 5 paragraphs, 5 sentences. But I think it's important to get really clear on why somebody should partner to support your nonprofit organization. And so this Trinity, very good point, right? So when you have a clearly articulated case statement, you can pull from that information to put into your grant proposals, into your funding proposals. It can be a guide for you when you visit individual donors to invite them into supporting your organization in a meaningful way. And so the components are pretty basic. And I would be willing to bet a lot of money that all of you have it, even if it's not written down. So a bit of homework for those of you that don't have one, and even for those of you that do have a case statement, would be to revisit it and make sure that you have a very well-defined mission and value, an articulation of your programs and services. Highlight what you've accomplished. And again, think about your accomplishments in the context of who you're meaning to serve. That can look like, and I think it's really compelling when it does look like, a story from an individual that's been involved with your organization. What are your plans for the future? You know, it's nice to know what you've done, but why would I support you moving forward? What more can you do with my $5, my $5 million? And then also your budget. You know, you don't necessarily have to include the budget in your case statement, but you better be ready to share it with donors when they ask. And this case statement is really a core tool to be used not only by your staff, by your colleagues, but it can also be a great training tool for your board members, right? A lot of volunteers love the work that you're doing and are passionate and ready to support you. This case statement can really be the outline for them for conversations with additional potential funders, whether they're looking for support through corporate investment, or individuals that they want to bring to the table. It can also be the guiding force for all that you do. It becomes kind of your template for everything that you do for your organization. Um, Imagine that the CEO of your organization came in and said, I'm going to be on the news at 4 o'clock tonight. What should I say? You don't have to make it up if you have already done the work to develop a strong case statement. Have your mission, your values, a little bit about your programs and services, accomplishments, where we're going in the future. It becomes really delicious sound bites to drive your organization forward. So there's some prompts that I think you can use when you are imagining and creating your case statement. What need do you respond to in the community? What's your mission? But more importantly, what activities do you do to support that mission? What have you accomplished? What work is still left to do? How much is it going to cost? How much time do you need to do it? And then critically, what will that enable you to do as an organization? All right. Asteria, I'm going to be on that one. So step 3, we've got our case. Now we have to set our goals, right? This is our roadmap. I like to use when I'm working with my clients the analogy of going on a road trip. We don't know where we're headed. We're going to end up everywhere and nowhere all at once. We're going to be distracted by the roadside dinosaur. We're going to spend too long at Buc-ee's in Texas. We don't know where we're going. We're definitely not going to get there. And so, as a reminder, step 1 was identify your assets. 2 was developing your case. And now we have to set our goals. And before we set those goals, you really have to have a good understanding of where you are now. So you want to think about your current fundraising strategies and answer the questions that are here on the screen, right? Who gives to you now? Who are your biggest funders? And where could you strengthen that funding base, right? So if your pie chart looks like way too much in one category and not enough in another category, perhaps that represents an opportunity to work in a different category of funding. Alternatively, and oftentimes, if you have very strong foundation support, there's a really great opportunity to find additional foundation funders. So, by having a pie chart that might be lopsided doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, get equal thirds or anything like that, but it's important to know what the opportunities are. Thank you, Sharnay. And so your organization should really have some kind of mechanism. We can go back to the other slide. Your organization should really have some kind of a mechanism for tracking your support. One of the biggest challenges that I run into with my clients and just folks that are talking to me about their fund development is not really having a great handle on where their current funders come from and where the potential is for additional funders. So whether you're tracking in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet, there are lots of free tools for customer and client relationship management. And those can be really important for making sure that you're tracking opportunities, outreach, conversations, statuses, because a problem is if you do get funding and don't do the work to follow up with the funder, right? Getting them in the door once is a great success, but you have to continue to do the work with those partners throughout the life cycle of your relationship. So I'm curious to know, I know the variety of sizes of organizations on this call probably have lots of different CRM or donor management tools. If you don't mind, drop the tool that you're using into the chat. Some folks might be using free software, again, might be using Excel spreadsheets. Some might be using big fancy mechanisms like Salesforce. But I think it would be really helpful for individuals to see the variety of tools that are out there. I also want to acknowledge that for some smaller organizations or even startup organizations, your current funders might be only family and friends, maybe a few board members. And that's okay, because every single organization starts somewhere. And the important work that you have is to look at them as your core, and then to figure out ways to build out from there. Who are your largest funders? Where are you generating the most amount of revenue? For some, this could be the government. Others, as we saw from that pie chart, it might be individuals, it could be foundations. Just having an awareness of that, and knowing also that if you tip too far in any one direction or have one funder that makes up the bulk of your revenue, that can be a pretty precarious situation for your organization to be in. So just being mindful of those relationships and treating our governments, our foundations, our corporations as relationships, just the way you would with individuals, is really an important practice to be implementing in your organization. I love this. This is a great list of resources that's coming in the chat. All right. When I also want to take a moment when we're talking about fundraising and setting your goals. Oftentimes I run into folks that say things like, I'm not a fundraiser. I hate asking for money. I don't want to be a beggar. All sorts of things that sound like they don't identify with this activity. And that's okay, because not everybody does identify with asking for money. But it's important to realize and recognize and honor that there are different stages of fundraising, and that our volunteers, our staff, our executive directors, our colleagues on our team have really critical and important roles to play in fund development that don't necessarily mean, please give me money. And some of those activities look like research and identification, right? Who's giving money? Who supports organizations like mine? Cultivation. It's a really important part of our work, is to help be in the room, identify where those funders are going to be, cultivate those relationships, call them in closer, invite them to your events, share your newsletters with them, share your stories of impact so that they begin to see themselves in the work. Solicitation, it's only one little piece of the fund development process. Who's going to ask for money? Usually it's you, right? The folks that are on this call are probably the solicitors, but it can also be a board member. It can be your CEO, executive director. It could be anybody, but it's important that they're doing it in a way that's true to your organization's mission. This is kind of fun. The next slide looks like the Amazon. And I just got off a boat in Brazil, and it looks an awful lot like this. But I think this is a really important visual, in that all of the different sources for revenue help feed into one big pot of money. And so now that you know where your organization is, the next step is figuring out how you get there. So there's a popular phrase in our work that sounds something like diversifying your funding base. What does that mean? Anybody want to share what that means? What it feels like to diversify your funding base? It's just like the saying, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Instead, you've got to put those precious little eggs in many baskets to protect them. And so this river is your organization. And all these little streams, the foundations, individual donors, government funding, corporate partners, which isn't on here, they all feed into the river. And so there you go. Thanks, Bobby. Implementing these different funding strategies decreases the possibility of that river drying out. So if the flow from one of these sources of income begins to slow down or is suddenly eliminated for whatever reason, you still have sustainability for your organization. And so if your organization only receives government support and that support ends, what happens? What happens to your organization? But more importantly, what happens to the people that you're meant to serve? And so, again, thinking about that pie chart at the beginning of class, foundations are only one current or potential revenue stream. Each organization is going to be different, can no longer afford resources. That's right. So if your funding stream dries up and you have all of your eggs in one basket, it's a problem. So what are some other potential revenue streams? Where does your organization receive its funding? What are we missing from this river chart here? I'm missing, if I just think about it, earned revenue, corporate sponsorship. Yes, that's right, Charnay, earned revenue stream. Tax capture, that's an interesting one. Fernando, thank you. There we go. Lots of them coming in. And so as you think about the diversity of your organization's funding streams, you're going to want to think about a lot of different things, right? Which funders could provide you with the most long-term security? And there's not one answer to this. It's really individualized to your specific organization, your relationships, asking questions of your funders, understanding their situations. So you really want to look at what's reliable, how likely these organizations are to renew in funding your organization, how strong is their support. I've been fundraising for a really long time, and in 2007, we never could have imagined that the automotive industry would not be around to support us. Then 2008 happened, and woo, the rug was ripped out from underneath a lot of organizations that didn't have a diversification of revenue. And so I don't share that to be doomsy at all, but I share that as a reminder that nothing is certain, no matter how solid it feels, no matter how long you've been receiving support from a specific revenue stream. You always have to be thinking about how many baskets and how many eggs you have. And so as you look at your fund development plan, think about what streams, additional funders you might be able to add to your revenue mix. Who's not funding that should be? So for example, if your organization runs an after-school program for teens, who in the community would be affected if this program stopped running? Another way to look at it is, who would be interested in supporting keeping the longevity of this after-school program for teens? It might look like teachers, parents, it could be small business owners, could be city partners, could be potential employers, other community organizations. So if you're focused on just one of those groups or two of those groups, you might consider how to call in closer to your work some of the others. But also I think it's as we're thinking about our revenue mixes in the sustainability place, Asteria, if you go down one more slide, it's important to be realistic. Some funders take a lot more energy and effort than it might be worth. I had a client a year or two ago that received federal funding for one of their programs, and the amount of energy and work that went into the reporting for that specific grant far outweighed the amount of money that they were receiving for the organization. So it's just, be realistic with how you're planning and approaching these additional funders, evaluate the potential revenue, the cost to bring in that funder, the time that it's going to take to pursue new potential funders, and what it's going to take to actually deliver on the promises that you're making. And that'll help you to be able to focus your efforts. And it also gives you good ammunition when you're talking to your colleagues and executive directors about how you will and how you will not spend your time. All right, so step 4, we've got to create a plan, right? Now we know we have our assets, we have our strengths, we have our goals. How do we get there? What are we going to do? What strategies are you going to implement? This is the fun part. This is where we get to put it all together. This is the road trip, roadside attractions planning that you're going to put together. So oftentimes this is the part that feels daunting to individuals. And it's not that scary once you actually sit down and start doing it. But it's important to also recognize there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There are, however, some pretty universal components and steps that are part of this. So for each of those revenue strategies, you're going to want to set a goal. You want to create a chart, timetable, and a description that gets it all into the details. So think through, for your revenue strategies, you want to think through who. Is it individuals, foundations, corporations? When are you going to ask for these gifts? What? You'll have this in your case statement, but what are we asking them for? You're going to want to make sure that it's outlined for each organization. And I'll show you in a few slides. It's not right now. I have one of my prospect lists screenshots that I want to show you that helps me to keep my brain in order sometimes. Why? Why are you asking for this funding? And how? What's the approach? Are you going to do it? Is a board member going to do it? Do you have to wait until July because that's when the RFP is open? And then you create the chart, timetable, little narrative about how you're going to get there. It sounds simple. It is simple, but it just takes dedicated workshop time. You can do it in a half day, likely. But you can't just say, I want $60,000 because I can do a program. And if I had the $60,000, it'd be done. It'd be great if we imagined it and the money showed up in our bank account, but that's not how it goes. So you have to be really sensitive to and put credence in your funding history. So for example, if you haven't received very much money from private foundations, you should be pretty conservative in your goal projections from private foundations. And as you're putting together this action plan, this strategy, a rule of thumb, and I don't know, there's a little bit of wiggle room on this. I like to say 1 in 4 funders will say yes to a proposal. Some folks will say 1 in 3. So if you need $60,000, you're going to need to have $240,000 in prospects. I don't know if some of my colleagues that have been doing this for a while have the same sort of rule of thumb. I think it depends on the life cycle of your organization and your success rate. You can start to track this over time and collect data points to get more clarity on this for your particular organization. But, if you need $60,000, you can't just ask for $60,000. Your organization capacity will also help you to determine what is realistic. So for example, if you're a one-person shop, you're the executive director, program manager, and fund development person, all wrapped up into one human, it's really unrealistic to say that you're going to create, to identify, to write, to manage, to create 75 grant proposals in 1 month. Having your plan, having your action plan and strategy will really help to keep your colleagues and volunteers in line with what's realistic for you. All right, so here is a super basic fundraising plan. It's an example going back to raising $60,000 in foundation grants by the end of the calendar year. This is not an elaborate fundraising plan, but this will identify some of those components. So when you say, I'm going to get $60,000, first thing you have to do is identify from who you might receive those funds. You spend a couple of months researching who gives to organizations like mine, right? A really wonderful resource for finding potential prospects. It's a tongue twister. Potential prospects is using the foundation directory online. And you can use that tool. Organizations that have budgets of $1 million or less, who are gold certified through Candid, can use this resource for free. And we'll do a workshop on that later. I think, Asteria, it's in May, right? That we're going to do the go for the gold. But in the meantime, just researching who's giving, how much are they giving, when are they accepting proposals. And so you can make that plan, right? Not every foundation accepts proposals or requests same time or in the same way. And then based on that research, we'll be able to determine how many prospects we have to approach, the appropriate amount for the ask, because in the foundation directory, you can get a good idea as to whether the foundation gives $5,000 or $5 million per request. And it varies, but it's good to know. All right. And then we're going to want to put together a little gift chart, something that looks like, do we want 2 grants at $30,000? Or do we want 6 grants at $10,000? Likely it's going to be a mix of $5, $10, $12, $20,000 gifts. So again, we have to think about your capacity. For some organizations, it's not going to be feasible to submit 12 proposals in 4 months. So as you're setting these goals and working through your plan, make sure that you're realistic with your timing, what you have. And then once you have that list of prospects, I would take it to my board members, my volunteers, folks that are going to help me with this work. And so the board and staff will review those prospects with you and help to determine the best way to cultivate those relationships, for setting up meetings, for having conversations to help increase the likelihood that you'll be successful with your ask. And then the rest of the year, you're just out there pounding the pavement. I know this is a very simplified example of a goal and a plan. It's much more nuanced than this, but this is the basics. Before class, you should have received a worksheet, and you can put some notes on there as you think about how you might approach this work on your own. Now here on the next slide, this is going to be hard to see, I think. I don't know, you have to see. I'll read you the top of this, but this is a faux prospect tracker. Ideally, you'll be using some of those CRMs to track your contacts, but if you're just getting started, many organizations will use a spreadsheet for tracking this information. Again, if you scroll back up, a lot of the colleagues on this call shared some of the tools that they're using. But what's really important is to be able to track these relationships so that you're on top of what's next. So my prospect tracker always has, the category. I rate the prospect on likelihood that I think they'll give, where I got the information. So if my board chair sends me 53 different prospects, I want to know that I have to go back to board chair and say, yes, they're a good prospect. No, they're not a good prospect, or I need a little bit more information before I move forward. Contact information, potential giving levels, how to reach out to them, whether or not they're accepting proposals, and then contact notes so that I can go back and say, you know what, board chair, they told me to get lost because they give to puppy dogs and we serve teenagers. That just helps. All right. So there is an assessing your fundraising planning strategies worksheet. It's just a good way to start thinking about this work. I encourage you to take some time, play with the worksheet, fill it out. And the next step is to implement the plan. You got to do it. You got to rejigger it. You got to rethink it. If you're going for 60 grand and you get 75,000 in the first 2 months, chances are good you've got to up your goals. Alternatively, if you've only identified $10,000 in potential funding, you might want to think about a different category. And then this part's really important. Evaluate your plan. think about, share out what's working, what didn't work. If your funder gave you $50,000, but it cost you $75,000 to use it, it's probably not a great partner to continue to work with in that same way. I would encourage you to have a conversation with that funder about how to maybe redeploy the funding, but it's always important to evaluate if the funding, if the juice was worth the squeeze. All right. So I think now I want to pause because we only have about 10 minutes left. I want to open it up to any questions. I'm off script, Asteria. I made it to step 6, evaluate the plan. But before we move away from this, I think we can put it on the 6 steps review, slide 26, that just reiterates what we talked about. And I'm going to open it up if anybody has a question, comment. An hour is not enough time to do a fund development plan, but it's certainly enough time to start thinking about the different components and how you might put it to work for your organization. So in the next 10 minutes or so, if anybody has a question, I think there's a hand raise option. See Dr. Julia, you can come off mute. Hello.
Hello, thank you so much, Trish, for this wonderful presentation. I did learn a lot, so I appreciate it too. One of the things that I was thinking about and listening as we cultivate our relationships with our donors, how do we stay genuine and authentic in the context of not coming off as ass kissing or selling our souls?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is, one, being aware of it. I think that is an incredible first step. But 2, using that case for support as your roadmap, right? Because it's not about them in that it's about your organization, right? And so our job as fund development professionals in a lot of ways is matchmaking our story from our organization to the motivations of a potential donor, whether it's an individual, corporation, or foundation. And so, I can appreciate that oftentimes fund development does feel like that. But I like to reframe it in that I'm matchmaking. If I've identified that my organization has a compelling story that's doing important work in the community, that's what I'm sharing. I'm not sharing your spotlight. I'm not telling you, why donor A, B, and C is going to be so much better as a result of this. I'm inviting them in and getting them closer to the work. But it's important to know what motivates anybody, right? These are emotionally charged decisions, whether they're from individuals, corporations, or foundations, which I know you all know, but those are managed by humans with emotions also. So we have to treat them like humans with emotions and acknowledge that they're relationships that need to be cultivated. But don't kiss anybody's butt. It's not what it's about. It's about sharing why your work's critical and important and inviting them into it. But thank you for that, because that is an objection that I get from board members. Don't want to kiss anybody's butt. Please don't. Who else? Does anybody want to share where they are at in their fund development planning process and where they might be stuck?
I have a comment/question. Also gratitude for this space. I learned a lot and looking forward for the rest of the series. I guess my question, going off of the thought of retaining engagement with individual donors to sustain support. I think for myself, I'm thinking through like what are different ways to incorporate both fundraising, but also uplift kind of like a mutual relationship. Because as you said, like our donors, like we depend on our contributors to do our work, and our work also impacts them. So I guess I'm just curious about different strategies or unique engagement in strategies when it comes to fundraisers.
Yeah, I'd be curious if any of my colleagues are interested in chiming in, but one thing that I think is really essential to our work as fund development professionals is communication, right? Like we can't have our comms teams in a silo separate from our fundraising teams. We can't have our program folks separate from our comms and our fund development people, because our donors want to know how their investment is making a difference. And so I would never suggest an organization to write a letter and put it in the mail in November just because it's Giving Tuesday, right? Like that sure, you might feel like you have to, but if you haven't been sharing throughout the course of the year through whatever means fits your organization's resources and timing, bye Amy, thank you. Whether you're using social media to share stories of impact, right? Trinity, what kind of organization do you work with?
So I work for an org called Healing by Choice, and we are Detroit-based healing practitioners that offer direct services to grassroots communities and larger organizations.
So great strategies to deploy throughout the course of the year. And maybe every month you're offering suggestions to everybody who connects with your organization about what it means to have rest and restoration and liberation. What does healing look like and feel like? How can you incorporate those wellness practices throughout the course of your individual daily life? But how do we wrap our communities in those healing practices? And so as we're sharing our work as thought leaders, because everybody on this call is a thought leader in the work that you're doing, and people that are engaging with us want us to be the experts. And so the more they see us as individuals and communities that heal, and they can see proof points that we are healing, hearing stories of compassion and healing, the more compelled they'll be to support us, because they'll feel closer to the work that we're doing. So I hope that answers your question. I think, some organizations will hire big fancy public relations firms. Not everybody can do that. Very few people can. But utilizing the resources that you have to call on the emotional connection that the individuals and donors might have with the work that you're doing will only make that ask stronger and more compelling. And it ties back to the case for investment, that case for support. So the homework for everybody on this call is to do that assessment. Think about doing a SWOT analysis for the work that you're doing. What are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Put together a really simple communication plan that looks like, in January, I'm going to share this. In February, I'm going to share that. When I ran fund development for a homeless shelter, back to school time was really a tough time for the mamas in my organization. And so we told stories about what it might be like to be somebody who's living in transition, sending your kids back to school, because the folks who are donors could also relate, whether it was when they were going back to school or when they're sending their grandkids or their kids back to school, the stress and the anxiety of what it means to put your baby on a bus with or without a backpack, with or without the tools, with or without the food to fuel their brains and their hearts throughout the course of the day. So try to think about how you can tie what you do to the donors and to the potential donors in the community. I think that's all the time we have. I'm grateful to see so many faces here. Listen to me talk about fund development. I love it, passionate about it, but the biggest gift is knowing that there are so many people in our region doing all of this really incredible work. I know it's hard. You're not alone. So if you ever need additional support, COACT is here to help you. Asteria, you have a commercial. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed the training today. A lot of good information, so a lot of good things happening. We do have a survey that we would like for you all to take. I did put the link in the chat. You all probably will be receiving a post email with the link in it as well. So I'm just asking that you all please take the survey. We'd like to know your thoughts, your ideas, what we can do better for next time, or if you have any suggestions of what trainings that you would like to take, that would be great. We do have our next training is April 4th, which is next Tuesday, and it's Introduction to Individual Giving. So I hope to see all of your bright and shiny faces at that next training session. Thank you once again for coming.